He entered 60 duels, knocked down 60 men, and walked away without looking back. He was the most fearsome warrior history has ever seen. But when Miyamoto Musashi entered a cold cave to die, he didn't bring his sword. He brought 21 sentences. This wasn't a manual for warriors. It was a mirror for the soul, a brutal strike against the comfort that enslaves us. They call it the Dokkōdō, the way of walking alone. Are you brave enough to look at your own reflection? Let's begin. There is a cave in the mountains west of Kumamoto, Japan, called Rigando, the Spirit Rock Cave. In the year 1645, an aging man climbed that mountain alone, sick, and quietly sat down to wait for death. He had spent his life on the road. He had fought in wars, wandered through provinces without a home, and met more than 60 men in single combat, and walked away from every one of them. He had never had a master for most of his life. He had never truly stayed anywhere. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, and by that point, his legend was already complete. But Musashi didn't go to that cave to rest. He went there to write. In the final days of his life, while giving away what little he still owned, he sat in the darkness of Rigando and distilled an entire existence into 21 sentences. He called them the Dokkōdō, a word that translates, roughly, as the way of walking alone. He handed the scroll to his most trusted student and died 7 days later, seated upright, one hand on his sword. The man who had never been defeated in life, apparently, decided he would face death the same way. What he left behind wasn't a warrior's manual. It wasn't a spiritual text. Exactly. It was something more uncomfortable than either. It was a mirror. The first thing that strikes most people when they read the Dokkōdō is how quiet it is. There's no drama in it, no grand declarations about glory or sacrifice. The lines are almost startlingly plain. Accept everything just as it is. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not hold on to things you no longer need. Do not fear death. Never stray from the way. These aren't the words of someone trying to impress anyone. They read like a man who has long since stopped caring what people think of him, not out of arrogance, but out of something that looks more like peace. And that, strangely, is what makes them so hard to sit with. Because most of us are doing the opposite of almost everything on that list. We carry things we no longer need, not just objects, but versions of ourselves we've outgrown, grudges we've fed for years, stories about why our lives turned out a certain way. We chase approval with a kind of hunger that doesn't get quieter the more we feed it. We avoid anything that makes us uncomfortable, and dress that avoidance up as preference, as taste, as simply knowing what we like. Musashi looked at all of that and called it, gently but clearly, the source of suffering. His 12th precept says to be indifferent to where you live. His 13th says not to pursue the taste of good food. These sound extreme, almost monastic, until you sit with what he actually means. He's not saying don't enjoy things, he's pointing at something subtler. The way we become enslaved to comfort. The way the right coffee, the right apartment, the right conditions become requirements without which we can't function. And once that happens, we've handed control of our inner state to the outside world. We've made ourselves hostages to circumstance. A man who needs perfect conditions to be at peace is never truly at peace at all. There's a line near the beginning of the Dokkōdō that might be the strangest of the 21. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. It sounds almost clinical. But what Musashi is describing is the trap of acting from impulse, from the hot flash of emotion, from temporary desire, from the mood of a single moment. How many decisions have you made from that place that you later had to undo? How many words came out of your mouth in one heated hour that took months to unsay? For Musashi, discipline wasn't about being cold. It was about being free. When you're not pulled around by every passing feeling, you actually get to choose. You get to act from something more stable. That's not emptiness. That's clarity. The precept people find most difficult is usually the 10th. Do not let yourself be guided by feelings of lust or love. It's the one most modern readers want to argue with, and honestly, that argument is worth having. But before dismissing it, it's worth asking what Musashi might have seen in his own life that led him here. He never married, he never settled. He gave his life entirely to mastery of the way, and by most accounts, he didn't seem to feel he was missing something. He seemed to feel he was free. Not free from feeling, but free from being owned by feeling. There's a difference between loving something and being consumed by it, between desire and desperation. He was pointing at the second category, the clinging. The way we sometimes call it love, when what we mean is that we can't stand the thought of losing. That kind of love doesn't enlarge you. It contracts you. What runs through almost every one of these 21 precepts, if you read them together, is a single idea about where inner strength actually lives. For most of us, raised in a world that measures worth by external markers, achievement, approval, accumulation, the idea that strength might be found in giving things up feels counterintuitive, almost suspicious. Surely you build a good life by acquiring skills, relationships, security, reputation. But Musashi spent 60 years testing that assumption against reality, and what he found was something different. Every attachment he shed made him more himself, not less. Every time he let go of needing something outside himself in order to feel whole, something inside him became quieter and steadier. The Dokkōdō is essentially his notes on that process, and the cave itself is part of the teaching. When he retreated to Rigando, he wasn't running away. He was going toward the only thing he still wanted to understand, himself. Most people avoid that kind of quiet because of what they might find in it. Musashi walked straight into it and asked it to speak. There's something worth pausing on in how Musashi died. He had himself raised up. His belt was tightened. His sword was placed at his side. He sat with one knee raised and waited, not in despair, not in resignation, in the same posture he had maintained for a lifetime, present, prepared, unafraid. His 17th precept says simply, "Do not fear death." It's easy to read that as bravado, as the kind of thing warriors say to sound formidable. But read it next to the image of that man in the cave, giving away his last possessions, writing his final thoughts not for posterity, but because they were true, and it starts to feel like something else entirely. It feels like someone who had already made peace with impermanence long before his body demanded it of him, who had practiced non-attachment so thoroughly that the final letting go was just the last step in a walk he'd been taking his whole life. That's not fearlessness born of numbness. It's fearlessness born of understanding. The 21st and final precept of the Dokkōdō is the one that ties everything else together. Never stray from the way. 5 words, and they seem simple until you ask yourself, what is the way, exactly? For Musashi, the way wasn't a religion or a set of rules to follow. It was alignment between what you believe and how you live, between who you say you are and what you actually do when nobody is watching. Straying from the way wasn't dramatic. It wasn't committing some great sin. It was the slow drift most of us know well, the gradual accumulation of small compromises, small distractions, small lies told to ourselves for the sake of comfort or convenience, until one day you look up and realize you've wandered quite far from the person you meant to be. Musashi didn't believe the way was difficult to find. He believed it was difficult to stay on, because the world, in his time as in ours, is full of things designed to pull you sideways. What makes the Dokkōdō strange and valuable at the same time is that it doesn't tell you what your way is. It doesn't give you a destination. It gives you a quality of attention. It says, stop outsourcing your inner life. Stop letting habit and desire and other people's expectations navigate for you. Go quiet enough to hear what is actually true for you, and then have the discipline to act from that truth, consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the path of aloneness, not loneliness. Not withdrawal from the world, but the kind of self-reliance that means you could lose everything external and still know who you are. Musashi was 62 years old when he died in that cave. A samurai, a philosopher, a painter, a sculptor, a strategist. He had been undefeated in combat for nearly 50 years, and yet the document he chose to leave behind wasn't a celebration of any of that. It was 21 quiet sentences about how to live with integrity, how to carry yourself through uncertainty, how to hold your inner life steady when the outer world refuses to be. For centuries later, people still carry that scroll with them, not because it offers comfort, exactly, but because it asks the right questions, the kind that don't go away just because you've ignored them for a while. The cave is still there, on Mount Iwato. The scroll still exists, and the questions Musashi sat with in those final days are still waiting, patient, unhurried, for anyone willing to get quiet enough to hear them.